The midday sun beat down on Lagos Island, making the air shimmer above the school's black iron gates. A gleaming luxury SUV rolled to a stop at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the chaos of the street vendors, shouting, kick drivers, honking, uniformed children laughing as they poured out for lunch break. In the back seat, 8-year-old Caleb Warren shifted impatiently. The AC hummed, and beside him sat a meticulously packed gourmet lunchbox prepared by the family chef. Honey-roasted chicken, jollof rice with a side of steamed vegetables, and a small tart in a foil cup. Caleb barely glanced at it. The driver, bored, tapped at his phone. Outside, just beyond the school wall, a barefoot boy weaved through the crowd. Amika 9, his shirt torn at the collar, and his plastic tray of bottled water swinging from tired fingers, scanned the scene hungrily. His stomach groaned, but he couldn't afford to stop. The bell rang, the school's iron gates creaked open, and a surge of children spilled out. As Caleb stepped out of the SUV, a group of boys dashed past him in a game of tag, knocking into his side. His lunchbox clattered to the ground. A moment of confusion followed. Emeka, startled and dazed, stumbled forward and instinctively grabbed the box nearest him, the pristine one, glossy and heavy. Caleb, annoyed, picked up the only thing left, a crumpled nylon bag with a piece of dry bread and a banana bruised black. Their eyes met. Just for a second, Emeka turned and bolted down the sidewalk, disappearing into the crowd before anyone could shout back inside the school. Caleb opened the bag with a curled lip, recoiling at the stale bread and soft banana. With a scoff, he tossed it in the trash. Miles away, under the shade of a bridge near Oberland, Emeka sat with his back against the concrete, heart pounding. He opened the box and froze. Inside lay a meal too perfect to be real. His hands trembled as he lifted a fork and took the first bite of spiced rice. For a long moment, he just sat there, chewing slowly, eyes full of tears he didn't understand. Then they felt quiet, grateful, aching. For the first time in a long time, Emeka ate until he was full. Caleb Warren, now 26, wore success like an ill-fitted suit, tailored to impress but never truly his. With a Harvard degree in business and the sculpted charm of someone born into wealth, he was everything the world expected from the only son of Douglas Warren, Nigeria's oil magnate and dealmaker extraordinaire. Yet behind the sharp suits and polished speeches was a man quietly unraveling. Music had once been his. Salisa, piano prodigy by 10, a songwriter by 15, but his father had dismissed it as a hobby for the weak. Legacy over leisure, Douglas always said. So Caleb buried his melodies beneath board meetings and financial reports, performing the role of heir with silent resentment. And still, there were days more often than he admitted. Mind drifted to a single, strange memory from childhood. He remembered standing by the school gates, lunchbox in hand, then watching a barefoot boy vanish into the crowd with his food. But it wasn't the theft that stayed with him, it was the boy's eyes, not pleading, not ashamed, but grateful, unapologetically human. Caleb had felt a pull then, something primal and unfamiliar, a question that never quite let go. Why did that moment matter so much? Douglas Warren, at 58, remained a titan. In every sense, his handshakes still dictated political tides. His name still hushed and feared in boardrooms across West Africa. He had clawed his way from post-military logistics into energy and infrastructure, buying loyalty with precision and disposing of sentiment like a liability. His son, he believed, was soft, educated, yes, obedient, yes, but lacking the killer instinct. Douglas didn't see that as a flaw to fix. He saw it as a weakness to exploit. Caleb's job wasn't to feel, only to follow. In a different Lagos, entirely beyond the gated estates and rooftop lounges, lived Emeka, now 27. He moved through the world with the quiet resilience of someone who had nothing to fall back on but grit. After years surviving the streets, selling water, running errands, fixing scraps, he'd caught the attention of a missionary teacher who saw something in him. A scholarship followed, then a technical apprenticeship, and finally an engineering degree. Today, Emeka worked in a modest but respected firm, maintaining pipelines and factory systems across the mainland. On weekends, he returned to the very bridges and shelters he once slept under, mentoring street kids and offering more than food-offering belief. He'd long forgotten the boy's name, if he ever knew it, but he remembered that lunchbox with painful clarity, the taste of seasoned chicken, the flaky pastry, the fresh fruit. It wasn't just a meal. It was a glimpse into a world that didn't seem meant for him, yet one he never stopped chasing. That lunch had whispered, "You matter too," and Emeka, young and hungry, had listened now. Two men moved through the same city, Caleb in the halls of oil wealth, Emeka in the quiet currents of rebuilding, and neither knew how their lives were about to collide again. But somewhere, deep in both of them, a single childhood moment waited to be reckoned with. Warren Industries, under mounting public pressure and a waning reputation, announced its latest PR move with much fanfare, a nationwide social impact competition aimed at investing in tomorrow's changemakers. Glossy billboards went up overnight, full of smiling children and sleek slogans. But inside the company's glass tower in Victoria Island, Caleb Warren saw something else. For his father, it was image controller distraction to bury headlines about worker strikes and oil spills. But to Caleb, it was a rare sliver of autonomy. Douglas had tasked him with overseeing the competition, assuming he'd keep it tightly scripted. Instead, Caleb quietly opened the gates wider. Real submissions, real people, a chance, perhaps, to do something that mattered. Weeks passed as pitches rolled in, some impressive, many forgettable. Then came a presentation that silenced the room. A young engineer, early 30s, lean and unpretentious, stood in front of the board with a blueprint that looked like revolution. His name, Emeka Obi. His proposal, modular, mobile shelters for homeless children, crafted from recycled scrap, insulated with sustainable foam, and powered by solar panels. More than housing dignity and structure. Caleb felt his stomach tighten. The name tugged at him. And then the face, still youthful, but hardened by life, clicked into place. The quiet fire in Emeka's voice, the way he didn't plead or perform, just spoke like a man who'd lived his pitch. That stirred something buried in Caleb's memory. A dusty afternoon, a lost lunchbox, a barefoot boy with grateful eyes. After the pitch ended to scattered applause, Caleb didn't wait. He stepped off the panel dais and walked straight to Emeka, ignoring the other judges and the press hovering nearby. "You seem familiar," he said, trying to keep his voice even. Emeka turned, studied him, then smiled, not warmly, but not coldly either. "I used to sell water outside Eden Park School," he replied. "Years ago." He said nothing more, no recognition in his tone, but the words struck like a match. Caleb didn't answer. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging a truth he'd only just accepted. As Emeka walked away, Caleb remained still, staring after him. The applause in the room long faded. Something inside him shifted, not guilt, exactly, but a yearning, a hunger to understand the thread that had always connected them. The past, it seemed, wasn't done with him yet. Caleb began visiting the small workshop where Emeka and a few volunteers assembled prototype shelter units from salvaged parts. At first, he told no one, especially not his father. Officially, he was just overseeing the competition, but unofficially, he lingered longer at Emeka's site than any other, offering resources, quietly contacts, suppliers, and even a sympathetic architect who owed Caleb a favor. Emeka didn't trust him at first. He kept a measured distance, always polite but never deferential. Over time, though, their conversations stretched. They spoke about infrastructure, displacement, music, hunger. Emeka talked about the kids he mentored, how they slept under bridges, just blocks from high-rise banks. Caleb talked less, listened more. With Emeka, he felt stripped of pretense, and that truth, though unfamiliar, was oddly liberating. But with every day he spent among rusted tools and earnest dreams, the walls of his inherited life began to feel thinner. He started seeing the cracks in the empire he was meant to uphold. How Warren Industries had profited off land seizures, silenced community protests with payouts, and funneled millions into private security firms rather than schools. He pulled one report after another from the company archives, things his father never meant for him to read. A school bulldozed in Port Harcourt. A woman whose child died from an oil spill-related illness paid to disappear. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the business model. When Douglas found out about Caleb's involvement with Emeka's project, he erupted. One morning, Caleb walked into the boardroom to find his father waiting, alone. The smile was gone. "You're wasting your time mentoring one of these ghetto boys," Douglas said coolly. "They see you coming a mile away. Soft, guilty, easy to manipulate." Caleb's hands clenched. "He's not asking for anything," he replied. "He's building something. Something we should be supporting if we meant a word of our campaign." Slogan. Douglas rose, voice steeled. "You weren't raised to fix slums. You were raised to lead a legacy." Caleb's voice dropped. "You weren't raised to feel anything at all." The rift widened after that. Douglas didn't try to hide his contempt. Board meetings grew tense. The more Caleb stood behind Emeka's project, the more the old guard pushed back. When one board member uncovered Emeka's juvenile record, 2 arrests as a teenager, both tied to survival on the streets, the knives came out. Quietly, a motion was filed to disqualify him from the competition. It was buried under PR language, but Caleb saw through it. Furious, he went to Emeka's workshop, cornered him while he soldered a solar connector. "Why didn't you tell me?" Caleb demanded, waving the printed background check in the air. "Why let me walk you into this blind?" Emeka didn't look up. He wiped sweat from his brow, calm. "Because people like you only believe in stories with clean beginnings," he said flatly. "You want to help now, but where were you when kids like me were getting locked up for stealing bread? You needed me to fit your version of redemption." The words hit hard. Caleb stepped back, stung. Emeka finally looked at him, eyes unflinching. "I didn't ask you to save me, Caleb. I asked you to see me." Then he turned back to his work. Caleb left without another word, but something had cracked open, not just between them, but within him. The truth was no longer abstract. It had a face, a name, a pair of eyes he couldn't forget, and a story that wouldn't be erased. And for the first time, he wasn't sure whose side he was on anymore. Emeka pulled out of the competition the next morning. No press, no drama, just a short email thanking the committee for the opportunity, citing creative differences. Caleb read it twice in disbelief. He knew it wasn't about creative differences. It was about humiliation, about pride, about being reminded that no matter how good your idea is, the world still judges the name attached to it. And Caleb once again had failed to shield him. That night, alone in the penthouse, surrounded by artifacts of wealth he didn't want, Caleb made a decision. The next day, he arrived at Warren Industries in a plain grey suit, called a press conference, and walked up to the mic without notes. Cameras flashed. Executives murmured behind him. But Caleb didn't flinch. He began with the campaign. "What began as a promise to support changemakers has become a performance," he said. "A means to polish our brand, not to create real impact. I can't, in good conscience, continue to stand behind this company not when it silences the very voices it claims to uplift." He didn't stop there. He spoke about the land grabs, the quiet settlements, the intimidation tactics. Then, in a moment no one expected, he named Emeka. One applicant, Emeka, Obi, built a project that could change lives. He was rejected not for the merit of his idea, but because he didn't fit our narrative, because he came from the streets, not the boardroom. The room fell silent. Douglas Warren, watching from his private office, erupted in fury. Calls flew, lawyers scrambled, an emergency board session was called. But it was too late. Caleb had resigned, walked away from $1 billion inheritance, from power, from everything he'd been groomed to become. He didn't care. He was done living someone else's story. He found Emeka later that evening at the workshop, sleeves rolled up, still building, still working as though nothing had changed. At first Emeka didn't say a word. Caleb stood there, nervous for the first time in years. Then, without ceremony, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small object trapped in cloth, gently handed over like an offering. Emeka unwrapped it slowly. It was the same lunchbox, gleaming now, metal polished, hinges repaired. Inside, a note: "That day, you didn't steal. You gave me something I've never forgotten. Now let me help you give more." Emeka stared at it for a long time, then looked up. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not pity, not debt, but recognition. That moment under the school gate all those years ago had never been about food. It was about dignity. Emeka reached out. His hand, Caleb took it. And just like that, they weren't beggar and heir anymore. They were men scarred, stubborn, and equal, ready to build something new. Together, with the first deposit from Caleb's trust fund, Emeka stood beside a half-assembled prototype in the dusty outskirts of Lagos, surrounded by scrap metal, solar panels, and a team of young apprentices, of them former street kids. The dream had become real. Within 6 months, the first fleet of solar-powered mobile shelters rolled out, compact, weather-resistant pods made from recycled materials, each fitted with basic lighting, a fan, and fold-out beds. They weren't perfect, but they were safe, and they were theirs. Caleb, now operating as the project's full-time manager, coordinated logistics, secured suppliers, built a website, and used every contact he had not to elevate himself, but to amplify the mission. Gone with the suits, the chauffeured cars, the sterile boardrooms. He walked the streets with Emeka now, shook hands with community leaders, listened. His old life status dinners, curated press photos, shallow applause, felt like someone else's skin. This one fit better, and for the first time, he felt useful. Word spread fast. Local NGOs reached out. Schools asked for talks. An article in Al Jazeera called the shelters a grassroots miracle. Then came an invitation. Emeka and Caleb were asked to co-present at a major international youth summit in Nairobi on wealth inequality and community-led innovation. The stage was massive. World leaders, corporate heads, and activists filled the audience. Caleb spoke first, opening with a story about the wrong lunchbox, how one act of accidental kindness planted a seed that would outgrow both privilege and poverty. Then Emeka took the mic, steady and clear. You can't fix the world by throwing money at it, but you can change it by giving people tools and believing they know how to use them. Back in Nigeria, the Warren estate was quiet. Douglas sat alone in the study, a tumbler of untouched scotch by his side, the TV glowing. He watched his son on stage dressed simply, no fanfare, no entourage standing beside a former street kid, being cheered not for his surname, but for what he'd chosen to stand for. Douglas didn't speak, didn't rage, just watched, because for the first time in his life, he was witnessing something he hadn't built, couldn't control, and maybe had never understood: purpose. The sun dipped low over Lagos. casting long shadows across the crowded streets of the mainland. It had been another long day, full of sweat and dust and noise. But, for Emeka, it had also been deeply fulfilling. The final workshop for the week had just concluded. Dozens of children from nearby slums had gathered in the makeshift community, wholesome barefoot, some hungry, all brimming with curiosity. The air still held echoes of their laughter, the scratch of crayons on paper, and the hopeful tones of Emeka's voice explaining solar panels, mobile shelters, and the magic of recycled materials turned into something that could shelter a life. Emeka stood quietly in the courtyard now, clipboard still in hand, eyes scanning the last of the children as they ran back toward the streets. Some waved, others just looked back, smiling shyly. These workshops weren't just about shelter designs or clean energy, they were about hope, about planting seeds in young minds who had only known the rough edges of survival. He wiped the sweat from his brow, the collar of his shirt stained from the day, yet his face held calm born of purpose. Behind him, Caleb emerged from the small office they'd set up inside the center. His sleeves were rolled up, dust on his slacks, and his ever-immaculate hair now curled slightly with the Lagos humidity. No longer the corporate air in crisp suits and cold boardrooms, Caleb had changed. He laughed more now, smiled without calculation. There was a softness in his walk, a quiet strength in his gaze. He watched Emeka with an almost reverent admiration, the kind reserved for those who chose to build rather than inherit. Just as they were packing up, a small figure approached from the alley beside the center. A young boy, no older than 6, barefoot, his shirt hanging from one shoulder, ribs faintly visible beneath his thin frame. He moved with the cautious hope of someone used to being turned away. "Uncle," the boy said, voice small but steady. "Do you have food?" Emeka turned. His eyes met the boy's eyes, that mirrored his own from decades ago. Eyes that had once looked up at a stranger through the slits of hunger, pride, and desperation. Without a word, he knelt, opening the worn leather bag slung across his shoulder. From within, he drew out an old, metallic lunchbox. The blue paint was faded now, the corners dented, but it had been polished, cared for. It had lived many lives. He unlatched it and opened it to reveal a warm meal packed that morning: fluffy jollof rice, golden fried plantains, a piece of peppered chicken, and a small bottle of chilled sachet water. He handed it to the boy gently. "This box," Emeka said quietly, "changed my life. Maybe it'll change yours too." The boy stared for a moment, as if unsure it was real. Then, trembling slightly, he sat cross-legged on the ground and began to eat. Slowly at first, then with quiet hunger. No words, just the steady motion of a child feeding a soul long denied warmth. Emeka stayed crouched beside him for a moment, then stood. He walked over to the curb, where Caleb had already sat, arms resting on his knees. Emeka joined him. Neither man spoke. They simply watched the boy eat, the city moving around them in its endless churn of noise, traffic, and time. To men, one born into opulence, the other into struggle. One separated by wealth, by circumstance, by an invisible lunchbox. Now bonded not just by fate, but by the conscious decision to reach across the divide. Together, they had chosen to build bridges where fences had been the norm. They were no longer just Caleb and Emeka, no longer the heir and the street child. They were partners, builders, believers. A camera, somewhere, might have captured the moment to men, a shared silence, a child eating with the reverence of someone given, dignity instead of scraps. But that wasn't the point. They didn't do it for the camera. They did it because something inside them remembered what it meant to be hungry for food, for purpose, for connection. And as the shadows lengthened and the boy finished his last bite, the two men stood, brushing dust from their clothes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply turned and walked away side by side, beward whatever came. Next dot from opposite ends of the street and life, now united, fade out.